17 years old, 2 grenades, 1 improbable survival. February 20th, 1945, Iwo Jima. Private First Class Jacklyn Lucas performed an act that, by every law of physics and biological limit, should have been a fatal end. Instead, he became a living testament to the extremes of human endurance and the defiance of fate itself. This is his story. Every detail you are about to hear is drawn from the official National Archives, Medal of Honor documentation, and verified military accounts. There is no need for embellishment. The truth of what actually happened on that volcanic island is a weight that history still carries. In the Pacific theater of the Second World War, Admiral Chester Nimitz once remarked that on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. But even among the titans of that struggle, the story of Jacklyn Lucas stands apart. It is a story of a boy who was too young to fight, too stubborn to follow orders, and ultimately, too resilient to break. Harold Lucas was born on February 14, 1928, in the small town of Plymouth, North Carolina. By the time he reached his 14th birthday, the world had changed. The smoke from Pearl Harbor had barely cleared, and the United States was mobilizing for a total war that required every available hand. Jacklyn didn't want to wait for his time to come through the draft. He saw the posters, he heard the radio broadcasts, and he felt a pull toward the uniform that outweighed any sense of personal safety. In August of 1942, he walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office. He had a problem, of course. He was only 14 years and 6 months old. He was, by every definition, a child. The minimum age for enlistment, even with parental consent, was 17, so he lied. With a steady hand and a calm demeanor, he forged his mother's signature on the consent forms. He added 3 years to his birth date, claiming he was 17. Whether the recruiter was spread thin by the rush of volunteers or simply chose not to look too closely at the boy's face, we will never know. But on August 6, 1942, Jacklyn Lucas was sworn in as a United States Marine. He was sent to Parris Island for boot camp, a place where even grown men were broken and rebuilt. Lucas, despite his secret youth, thrived in the brutal South Carolina humidity and the unforgiving discipline of the drill instructors. He was a natural athlete, standing 5 feet 8 and weighing 180 pounds, and he possessed a level of mental toughness that masked his age. From there, he was assigned to the Marine barracks at Pearl Harbor. For the next 2 years, Lucas worked as a heavy equipment driver. It was a life of loading trucks, moving supplies, and standing guard duty under the Hawaiian sun. To any other teenager, this would have been a dream assignment, far from the slaughter of the front lines. But for Lucas, it was a cage. He watched the combat units move out. He saw the ships leave for the Solomons, for Tarawa, and for Eniwetok. He was a Marine, but he felt like a spectator. He began to grow restless, and in the Marine Corps of 1945, a restless Jacklyn Lucas was a dangerous thing. By the beginning of 1945, the momentum of the war had shifted. American forces were island-hopping toward the Japanese mainland. The next objective was a desolate, sulfurous rock only 8 square miles in size, Iwo Jima. Japanese planners, led by General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had spent years turning this island into a subterranean nightmare. They hadn't built a defense on the island, they had built the defense into it. 21,000 defenders waited in a network of 18 miles of tunnels. They had artillery positions carved into the volcanic rock of Mount Suribachi that could rain fire on every inch of the landing beaches. Jacklyn Lucas knew the big one was coming. He was still at Pearl Harbor, still driving trucks, and still being told his place was in the rear. He decided that if the Marine Corps wouldn't send him to the war, he would go to the war himself. On February 8, 1945, Private First Class Lucas went absent without leave. He didn't head for the bars of Honolulu. He headed for the docks. He managed to slip past the sentries and stow away aboard the USS Duell, an attack transport ship carrying the 5th Marine Division. For days, he lived as a ghost within the ship. He hid in the head, the ship's bathrooms, and squeezed into storage compartments behind crates of ammunition and sea rations. He survived on scraps of food and the silence of a man who knew his fate was on the horizon. He was eventually discovered when the ship was already deep into the Pacific, far past the point of no return. When he was brought before the commanders, he didn't apologize. He didn't ask for mercy. He simply told them he wanted to fight. The commanders were faced with a unique dilemma. They had a stowaway who was technically a deserter, yet he had deserted toward the most dangerous battlefield in the world. Recognizing his ferocity and the desperate need for riflemen, they didn't put him in the brig. They reduced him to the rank of private, stripped him of his pay, and assigned him to C Company, 1st Battalion, 26th Marines. Jacklyn Lucas had achieved his goal. He was going to Iwo Jima. He had just turned 17 years old 6 days earlier. The invasion began on February 19th. The pre-invasion bombardment had been massive, but as the first waves hit the shore, they realized the shells had done little to the underground fortress. The sand on Iwo Jima was not sand at all. It was soft, gray volcanic ash. Men sank to their knees. Vehicles bogged down. And then, the Japanese unleashed everything. Jacklyn Lucas went ashore the next day, D-Day +1. He stepped off the ramp into a world of chaos. Wrecked landing craft lined the shore like the rib cages of dead whales. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and rotting vegetation. Lucas and his unit began the slow, agonizing push inland toward the southern airfield. In this terrain, the enemy was invisible. A Marine could walk right over a Japanese pillbox and never know it until a machine gun opened fire from behind. On the morning of February 20th, Lucas was part of a 4-man fire team creeping through a twisting, narrow ravine near the base of Mount Suribachi. The rock walls were jagged, and the visibility was poor. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. A Japanese patrol opened fire from a concealed trench just a few yards away. The Marines scrambled for cover in the shallow craters of the ravine. In the frantic exchange of gunfire, 2 Japanese Type 97 grenades were thrown into their position. In a confined ravine, a grenade is not just an explosive. It is a wall of high-velocity iron. Lucas saw them first. He saw the iron cylinders hitting the ash. He didn't have time to shout a warning. He acted on an instinct that defies modern psychology. He lunged forward, throwing his body directly onto the first grenade, shoving it into the soft volcanic soil with his chest. At the same time, he reached out and pulled the second grenade underneath his hip. He shouted a warning to his comrades, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the detonation. 2 grenades, 1 17-year-old boy. The explosion was muffled by his body, a wet, heavy thud that sent a cloud of gray ash into the air. His 3 squad mates, shielded by the mass of Lucas's frame, were blown back but remained largely uninjured. They looked toward the spot where Lucas had been. They assumed there was nothing left to save. But Jacklyn Lucas was still there. When the smoke cleared, his squad mates found him conscious, though his body had been shredded. The blast had not torn him apart, but it had embedded over 200 pieces of jagged metal into his torso, his arms, and his legs. His right arm was nearly severed. His wrist was shattered. His face was a mask of blood and ash. Navy corpsmen reached him under heavy fire. They were stunned to find a pulse. They worked frantically to stop the catastrophic bleeding, but the medical consensus was grim. No one survives 2 grenades at point-blank range. He was evacuated to a field hospital, then to a hospital ship offshore. The surgeons worked in shifts, performing 21 separate operations over the following months. They pulled iron out of his lungs, his liver, and his limbs. Some pieces were so deep, buried against his spine or his heart, that the doctors decided to leave them. Jacklyn Lucas would carry the metal of Iwo Jima inside him for the rest of his life. On October 5, 1945, Jacklyn Lucas stood on the lawn of the White House. He was 17 years old, scarred and leaning on a cane. President Harry Truman draped the Medal of Honor around his neck and whispered to him, "I'd rather have this medal than be president." He had gone from a 14-year-old liar to a 17-year-old national hero. The transition to civilian life is often the hardest battle for a hero, and for Lucas it was no different. He struggled to find his place in a world that didn't involve ravines and grenades. He returned to North Carolina, finished his education, and tried various business ventures. But the most incredible chapter of his life came years later. In 1961, Lucas decided he wasn't finished. Despite the shrapnel still in his body and his permanent limp, he joined the United States Army. He didn't want a desk. He joined the 82nd Airborne Division. He wanted to jump out of airplanes. During his training, he suffered a dual parachute failure. Both his main and his reserve chutes failed to open correctly. Once again, death reached for Jacklyn Lucas. And once again, he survived the fall, walking away from a jump that should have been fatal. He lived his life with a ferocity that suggested he was trying to outrun the shadow of that day in 1945. He became a fixture at military commemorations, always humble, always insisting that the real heroes were the ones who didn't come home. Jacklyn Harold Lucas passed away on June 5, 2008, at 80 years old. He lived 63 years longer than any doctor on Iwo Jima thought possible. What we know are the facts. We know a boy who wasn't supposed to be there saved 3 men who were. In a time shorter than a human heartbeat, he chose their lives over his own. The Medal of Honor citation calls it conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity. But for those who knew him, it was simply Jacklyn. Heroism is often portrayed as a calculated, noble choice. But the story of Jacklyn Lucas reminds us that sometimes heroism is messy. It is a stowaway in a ship's bathroom. It is a forged signature. It is a 17-year-old who refused to sit out the war. We often focus on the grand strategy of the Pacific, the maps, the generals, and the turning tides of empires. But the war was won in the gray ash of ravines, by individuals who decided that the person standing next to them was worth everything. Jacklyn Lucas's name is etched into that history, a boy who lied to serve, and then gave everything so that others could live. While Jacklyn Lucas survived by absorbing the enemy's fire, history remembers another Marine who, on the ridges of Guadalcanal, became the fire itself. Sergeant John Basilone held a line that should have broken, manned a gun that should have run cold, and forged a legend that redefined what one man could achieve against impossible odds. His story, like that of Lucas, serves as a testament to the heights of the human spirit. These names are more than records. They are reminders of what it means to go above and beyond. To help us preserve these stories for the next generation, subscribe to the archive now. To see another story of impossible courage, click the video on your screen. Every citation is a life. Every life is a story. Thank you for honoring them with us.